Welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy Podcast. My name is Jed and we are reading the Phaedo. Thank you for joining me. And right now, where we're at so far in the series is Socrates is laying it out for us why our souls must be immortal. And what's he using to show us that? The logos of the theory of learning as recollection. It started with, so just to recap where we are in the setting of the book. Socrates is in prison on his last day. He's just given his doctrine for what philosophy is, which we can recognize as one of the four categories of something called the dialectic, which is the use and power of the logos. The logos, of course, is what we're after in philosophy, which is the intellectual and intelligible, the understandable and knowable pattern of all of reality, this universe, and the other dimensions of reality, especially the realm of being. And there's a big question of how the logos relates to what is beyond even being, the oneself. That's a question we've got in our back pockets from our reading of the Parmenides. So, in our quest to find out what the logos is, master it ourselves, we are also learning what the heck the dialectic is. So we can master that also ourselves. But we have so far recognized that there are four categories. Turn down my light a little bit. The first category, of course, is definition. You define your hypothesis, you define the subject that you're wanting to explore, and we have a hypothesis that Socrates' doctrine is within the text itself is the definition. He's giving the definition of philosophy. What is philosophy? Lay it out for us. And then after he did that, this is what philosophy is. We realized that, hang on a second, if the logos is the pattern of reality that goes all the way down, then even within the definition stage, there are probably going to be four sections within his doctrine of what philosophy is, which he also calls the defense of philosophy, why we should be a philosopher, why the life of the philosopher is the best life, not just for our life, but for our dying. And not just for our dying, but our being dead. And of course, coming back into life. So for being alive and being dead and coming back to life and the process of dying, philosophy is the best thing you can do for all four of those things. Four. Interesting that there's a four in that, and we just pointed out there's four parts to the dialectic. Why is that interesting? Well, as a philosopher, it's a game, it's a quest. It's the human game and it's the noblest quest. And how do we play that game? Well, we look for patterns. We look for key terms, the ultimate terms, like what is justice itself? What is being itself? What is the soul? What is the meaning of life? These sorts of questions. We look out for key terms that are around those ideas. But we also look for patterns. Because if there is a logos, an understandable and knowable structure to all of reality, then we'll be able to recognize it in the patterns. It will have to follow some sort of pattern. So when we notice, oh, there's a group of three, there's a triad over there, we take note of it, we put it in, we write it down, put it on the board, put it in our notepad, and we add that to our skill tree. And then when we have a few different triads, we can take the branches of the tree, rub it together and realize something, see a new connection between those particular things to shed light and gain new insights on the individual things themselves. So we recognize that there's a four. Oh, and there's also a four in what philosophy is for. Dying and being dead, coming back to life and living. Socrates said that philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying. So that was within his doctrine, his defense of philosophy, why we should live philosophy, why we should live the life of a philosopher, why we should do philosophy, and why we should only do philosophy. To the point that if we can separate as much from our physical body, separate the soul outside of the body, so that we can do philosophy better. So we're not distracted by the aches and pains, but also the fears and the foolishness, and also our desires, but also the need for regular physical body stuff like sustenance. All of these sorts of things can distract us from our pursuit of philosophy, our pursuit of the logos and the dialectic. So on his last day, he said, therefore, as a philosopher, you'd want to follow me to where I'm going. I'm, of course, being killed by the state for doing philosophy. But if you're a good philosopher, you're doing your life's work well, you'd probably want to follow me, which means we can experience death. Welcome to the chat, by the way. Thank you for joining me. We can experience death and the process of dying before they bury you, before it's your last death in this incarnation. So, all of these parts were within Socrates' explanation or doctrine of philosophy, but also defense of philosophy, which we are calling his definition within the text as a whole. If the text as a whole is about philosophy, it probably follows the dialectic. And there's a word for that, playing out what you're explaining in a story. That's called mythology. Characterizing the elements that you're explaining within a story. Last time we recognized that's called mythology, by the way. And Socrates says, what am I going to do on my last day? I'm going to explain as best I can philosophy and where it is that I'm going to, what that place is going to be like. But also I'm going to mythologize it. In fact, I've been spending my last couple of days taking the poems of Aesop and adding the logos to them. And also making my own original poetry to mythologize philosophy, the logos and the dialectic. So, last time we looked at that and we were, interesting, explain and mythologize. That sounds like the first two categories of the dialectic that we're learning. Definition, you explain it, and you give a demonstration. Definition and demonstration are the first two categories of the dialectic. So, when in the text, after he's given his definition of his doctrine, we're asking the question, is he going to give us a demonstration of it? Is he going to use it? Of course, there are two more categories, dividing it up into its arguments and then synthesize, that's division. And then finally, the fourth category is synthesizing those arguments together and then analyzing them relative to the definition. That comes all the way back around. So as a result, you've understood the original thing you're defining better from having gone through the process. And in the chat, we've been getting questions, why, if everything is from self as the ultimate, the first cause of everything, but also the final cause, if it's our destiny to return, to revert, why do that? And if this idea that everything we learn we somehow knew at some earlier stage before our birth, why go through this process of forgetting only to remember again? That's a question we have in our inventory. Being a philosopher is developing questions, taking them with you, honing them up, making connections between questions to other questions, seeing the stakes and the importance of the questions. Why do we care about that? Because it makes a question stick. Making a question stick allows you to concentrate on it. Seeing more of the importance of it, seeing how this is the most important question, or it relates to all other questions, or there are some stakes to this question, helps you increase your concentration so you can concentrate on it at all times without distraction. That's a transition from concentration to meditation. Of course, there are spiritual traditions that give you a question. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Questions like these are called koans, questions that you will have to keep holding because you can't answer them. They're a trick question because they're designed to keep you in a curious, open, focused state of mind. Because you're holding onto a question. Questions make you curious, but if you can hold on to it, you've got a focused curiosity, a focused openness and wonder, which is the ideal conditions for the experience of separating your soul from the body. All yogas, in essence, have that. Some sort of method. Yoga means method to join with your soul outside of the body. So this artificial question, you could call it, is a koan. But what we're doing in philosophy is developing our own, giving birth to our own questions, which means we're naturally curious. We're naturally going to focus on them. We're naturally going to use them to develop not only our understanding, because it's a question, you look for answers, you develop an understanding to answer them, but the state of mind of focused openness and curiosity and wonder. Why? Because philosophy, according to what we're reading in the Phaedo, is a mystic tradition. It's not just a development of understanding. It's that. It's the best at that, of course. The dialectic and the logos is the excellence or the ideal of understanding, which is why it's called dianoia. And it's the use of the self logos. Self means the honorific or the best. But also it's a mystic tradition. It's supposed to change your state of consciousness. What dimension of reality are you experiencing? And in whatever dimension you're in, how are you relating to reality? We want to be happier. We want to be in a better state of mind. We're interested in that. We want to see the ultimate of reality. If the physical world is some sort of reflection or created by a higher world, let's get into the higher world. Let's see what's there. Which is why his doctrine is about separating the soul from the body, which he calls purification. So it's not like we're leaving something, we're purifying ourselves from an ignorance, from a false attachment to our body as though we are just that. He calls it a purification. And this is the death that all philosophers seek and long for and try to connect with and practice and deserve. Purification, separating of the soul from the body, makes it a mystic tradition. So, if we're developing questions, it's not an artificial one like a koan. We're naturally curious about it, which means we're naturally developing our understanding and our open state of mind, which means we can hold on to the question, which brings us from concentration to meditation, sustained concentration. But also, it makes us most receptive to what Socrates calls noesis or nous, the direct experience of the thing you have a question about. You join with the question. You join with the object you are curious and focused and wondering and developing an understanding of. That's philosophy. And that transition from concentration to meditation finishes as a meditation to contemplation. Contemplation, when you join with the object. So we want to make sure our questions are interesting enough for us to hold on to, but also are of the sorts of things you can join with. Which means we have to do our best to separate from the physical world, which has lots of things we can be curious about and have questions about. What did this celebrity do? What is this politician up to? What's going on over here in this sports team? Yeah, you can develop questions about them, but they're things of the physical world, meaning you can't contemplate with them. You can't join with the politician or the celebrity or the sports person. The sorts of things that are ideals that have an existence in being beyond the world of becoming that we see through our senses. Everything is in a change in our world of becoming. Everything is growing or decaying, coming to be or dying. But the realm of being does not go through that. It is being. It's eternal and immortal. And the sorts of things that are joinable in that realm, we call the self-ver terms. Beauty itself, justice itself, goodness itself, excellence itself, and equal itself. Self-equal. So some of them are more easy to wrap your head around. Oh yeah, okay, if there's I know that, we want to join with things that we consider beautiful. And if there's an ultimate experience in being, then I guess it would be the most beautiful, sure. But what does it mean to experience equal itself? That sounds like an intellectual concept, not a being. So we have some questions about that because it is one of the Self terms. So we develop questions and we look for key terms. And we put those together as well. So one of our big questions is, what exactly is the dialectic? And we are getting a kind of a hidden definition of it in Socrates' doctrine, because he talks about collecting ourselves together in some way away from our physical senses, which is a preparation through this kind of understanding called dianoia to make us most open and receptive to the divine self, giving us a spiritual initiation into that realm of nous, using the sense we call ousia, which is also the nature of our consciousness and also the nature of being, self-ousia, in the realm of self-being. So we're wondering, well, how do we pull that stunt off? What's the method? Well, that's one of the puzzles, because he didn't really outline how to do it. He just said what's involved in it. You collect yourself together in some way from all of the parts of your body. And out of the body, you collect yourself together, self by self, out of the body. And you try and dwell there as much as you can, both now, in the present, and in the future. What the heck does that mean? Well, we're carrying with us a hypothesis that the sort of language that he's using to talk about that connects with this language of dialectic. Separating from our senses, that's the dialectic. Collecting the ideas together, that's what you do at the end. You collect all of the ideas together and you come back to the start. So, why go through this? Why go through this learning that we're here to do in this life of the logos and the dialectic, of the self terms that are of reality, but also we call them self terms, and not only are they of ultimate reality and being, but they're also somehow of the self. So we have to go beyond the ultimate experience, back to the self. Why do it if that's where we started from? That's a question we have to. One of those real koan questions, spiritual questions that we want to keep focused on if we find it interesting. One way of reflecting on that question is, well, that's kind of what the dialectic does. You start with a definition, and then you give a demonstration of it. Then you divide it up into all of the things that are related to it, or all of the arguments. But then you have to synthesize all that together. And then you analyze it, use that synthesis to better understand the definition you started with. So you have benefited, you've grown, you have seen more about that subject, which means, well, I've seen more about this thing that I started by defining, so I can give a new definition and start again. Give a new dialectic on it, because the practice of going through a dialectic has shown me more about the subject. I'm carrying with me a greater logos, a greater understanding, a greater clarity of that subject, meaning I can do another dialectic. I can explore that subject, define that subject again. So it might not answer our question of if everything that we learn in logos and knowledge, logos, our understanding, knowledge, our remembering of it, our remembering of the direct experience, or having the direct experience, ideally, if everything we learn we at one time knew, then why do we forget it? Or why go through the process of forgetting just to learn again? I'm not sure, but this dialectic might give us some clues. Why go through definition, demonstration, division, and synthesis analysis only to go through it again? What's the benefit? That's a question we have. And that might be a question that comes up in the text, because after Socrates gave a definition of philosophy in his doctrine and defense, hoping that it would be more convincing than it was to the people who sentenced him to death a few days ago, one of the people there, Simmias and Cebes, there are two characters that we're following, they spoke up and said, hang on a second, yeah, I really like what you said, all that stuff you said about philosophy, that's very interesting, but some people might not be convinced because they might not think, I mean, if you're saying that philosophy is collecting yourself together, separating from the body, and then continuing the process even out of the body, that would mean that the soul is not, that we are not the body. That our essence, our soul, is not physical. We have some sort of immortality. There's an immortality of the soul. And not a lot of people think that way, Socrates. Some people think like when your body dies, your soul kind of scatters to the wind, especially if you're afraid of death. It's like a breath or something like that. So, what arguments can you give us to prove to us that the soul is immortal? And this is fascinating because what's he asking? He's asking Socrates, hey, can you change our minds? Can you turn us around to relate to the subject that we originally were thinking about in a new way? This is my definition of the soul. It's not immortal. It can't last after your death. So therefore you can't do philosophy. Just separating from the body, that's crazy talk. You're a crazy man. That's my definition of the soul that I got from my upbringing and so on. Can we go through some sort of process so that by the end of it, I can reflect back to the subject in a new way? See what was there the whole time, but see it in a new way that required me to have gone through this process. That's what he's asking. Which sounds very much like the progression of everything. If everything is from the one self, going through the levels of reality, and we become human, and then we ask these questions, we pick up the game of philosophy so we can return home and find our destiny. That's kind of what we're asking Socrates to do. Our question: can I go through the process of learning in some way, which we're doing together by reading this text and learning the logos and dialectics, so that we can understand the self in a new way, understand the soul in a new way? And it sounds like he's asking, hey, Socrates, change my mind about the soul. How do we do that? This is one of the other reasons why we're very interested in the dialectic, because it's the structure of how to change our mind. If we want to learn, we want to change our understanding. Sometimes we pay a lot of money to go to school to change what we understand about something, to learn more about it that we didn't think of before. But also, the things we do, we want to be made happier, be made better. We want to think of ourselves in a better way. We want to relate to ourselves and the world in a better way, and reality. So we want to change our mind. Of course, we've talked about the opposite of that, getting entrenched in whatever you already think. We call that prejudice. Or even worse, pathologos, the unsuspected prejudice or false beliefs you hold about yourself ultimately and reality ultimately. That takes you away from the self-logos and to this pathologos train to cause repeating cycles of failure and problems in your life that should birth a new question as soon as you get into this game. Oh, why do I always have this problem? Why can I only get this far towards excellence, this far towards knowing, this far towards understanding, this far in my relationships, this far in my job, this far in my sport, until I have the same problem over and over again? That seems to come back around, having had experience that confirms my false belief about myself being stupid or not good enough or not divine or not the one self. Some fundamentally false and inadequate view of myself. Just like the dialectic, but its negative version, its shadow, causing our problems, which can give us the second kind of question we're here to give birth to. We're naturally curious about the highest things. What is justice? What is beauty? What is ultimate reality? What is the meaning of life? But we're also naturally curious about our own problems. Why does this keep happening to me? I don't want it to happen to me. I'm naturally interested in removing my stupid problems. The natural koan. Two kinds, about the logos and the anti-logos. We talked about how this is a byproduct of our world and our point in evolution. conservatism. I want to hold on to whatever I already think. I don't want to change my mind. I don't want to be progressive or learning or develop or evolve. Make it the way it was again. And how that's tied with all sorts of scams and cons and tyranny and fascism. We're not learning, we're not changing. So we don't want to fall into that trap. We don't want to have a stagnant return, a return where we just confirm our biases. We don't evolve up, turn around, and we want to turn around and see the subject in a new way to make ourselves better, more smart, more enlightened, more happy, higher dimensions of reality, closer to being. That's growth. That's what we're here for. That's learning. That's development. That's evolution. That's the spiritual quest. It's personal development. The opposite, stagnation. I just want everything to be what I already think because I like feeling smart without actually learning. That's the scams. People who offer you scams are saying, hey, you don't have to actually go through the logos and evolve up and play the human game. You're just perfect the way you are. In that you're already better than everyone else because you're white or because you're rich or because you're from our country, nationalism, racism, because you're a man, sexism, right? Establishing your excellence, not through the path to excellence, but by trying to trick you into not following that, which is what all tyrants do. Turns off your mind so they can play out their own tyranny. Part of human history, part of our current world. So we don't want to stagnate. And of course, the selling point is always, you're naturally better. You don't get better. And everyone who's trying to get better, they're bad. You're naturally, that hierarchy of development we go through, you're already at the top. Because God picked us. Because you're this color. Whatever. It's a con. It's a con. Why? Because it turns off your mind and allows you to be manipulated. Because if you're not using your mind, your understanding, your knowledge, then your images and beliefs can be manipulated. So you will act against your own interest, forget why you're here, and be manipulated for the sake of the tyrant. And what do all fascists and tyrants say? The way it was in the past is the good way. Make Germany, make America, make Australia great again, whatever. Remember the old days? Stay stuck in the past. Your prejudices, remember those? So that's why we're interested in another reason why, because it has a real world application. The dialectic can give you an understanding of the nature of tyranny and cons and scams and fascism. Helps you understand the political game. It's not left versus right. It's conservatism or unaware of our unconscious blind allegiance to our prejudices, stagnation, which keeps us stuck in our repeating cycles of failure. Hey, how many genocides do we need? How many wars do we need? How many injustices do we need until we stop repeating the cycle and start learning? How do we learn? Apply the dialectic and logos. So we can use the logos and the dialectic to understand the nature of our problems, the stagnant dialectic of the false logos that does not allow for changing of mind, so we can understand the nature of our problems, but also can provide the solution, because what's the solution? Recognizing this is a shadow of an outline, or the word in the text, outline of a shadow. It's a reflection of the true thing we're here to do. That wouldn't work if we weren't seeking this pattern. If we weren't following, if our soul wasn't following this pattern. It's the shadow of it. So the dialectic allows us to understand what we should be doing. So what's the alternative party or the other way of being? The logos party, the logos way of being, the logos and dialectic, philosophy. Why? It's the true form of this. Just like if If you look at your mirror reflection, you don't get mad at the reflection in the mirror because it's a distorted reflection. It can't change. The mirror can't change. It's always going to be stuck the way it is. It doesn't have mind. Your reflection in the mirror doesn't have understanding, doesn't have knowledge, doesn't have will, can't change its mind. However, you, standing in the mirror, can do things, are able to learn, are able to change your mind, are able to put on a hat or put on another jumper to change the reflection. Equally so, how do we solve this problem? Go to the higher dimension. What's the higher dimension of the cause of tyranny and injustice and problems? The logos, the dialectic. Similar sort of reversion, only it allows for understanding, not maintaining the images, false beliefs and prejudices. There is a turning around, but not to justify or defend your original definition, but to see the definition, see the subject in a new way, which means you're turning around but going up, spiraling up. That's the dialectic. So when Socrates says, oh, this is philosophy, the art and practice of dying through the development of the dianoia, because that's what makes us receptive to direct experience of the higher dimensions, gets out of the two-dimensional mirror reflection, jumps into the real world, and we do that through the logos and the structure of the logos, the dialectic, and doing it. After doing all that, saying, oh, by the way, that's mystical. His friends are like, yeah, I like it, but I'm kind of still, as a part of me in that camp, I like what you're saying, Socrates. And I mean, it'd be hard to find a fault in what you're saying because you're brilliant and you're Socrates. And you not only understand it, but you have experienced it and you have come back to help us. So you have it, you can see through it. So no one's really gonna, you can't argue with it. It's pretty ironclad, but there's still part of me over here in this stagnant one. I can't go through that evolution to higher dimensions of reality, higher states of being, understanding, states of mind, because I was told something else, a fundamental false belief about myself and reality, specifically that I am my body and the soul is not immortal. Can you help me out? That's where we are. Can you help me out? Because Socrates is saying, hey, that separation from your body is a kind of purification. It removes your troubles. Because essentially, one way of understanding all of our troubles, it's the influence of our physical form. All war is fighting for more riches or honor, which are desires of the physical body. Your soul doesn't desire honor among the physical world. Doesn't desire physical riches. That's what wars fought over. Not just globally, but within ourselves. The internal conflict. We are fighting ourselves. We are pulled this way and that. We have foolishness flooding in because of the fears of losing physical pleasures or losing our physical form. Fears of the pains or losing the pleasures. Desires. Needing to race this way and that to get stuff to feed yourself and clothe yourself and house yourself. All these sort of things that keep us distracted from our true quest of philosophy. And not only that, when we do have time for philosophy, they come flooding back in again. Oh no. And he says they drive you out of your mind. Which is amazing that he's saying this 2,500 years ago, and it's true even today. How little time we have in, famously, this extreme injustice and corruption of capitalism is making it so we have less and less time to pursue philosophy, despite having the understanding, resources, and technology to meet pretty much all human needs efficiently, sustainably, and renewably. So long as we picked up the logos and developed a rational approach instead of allowing the tyranny of the injustice of the anti-logos to play out. Allow people to lie on media to convince us to cons. Oh, you'll vote for me and I'm going to... The cause of your problems isn't that you don't have the logos and dialectic. It's because of the other colored people, the other country of people. And it's not the tyranny of the oppressors who are hoarding all of the riches and the fame, because these are the two things that result of not being a philosopher. And instead of loving philosophy, philosophia, love of wisdom, they love the body. That's not the reason. Even though it's written literally in the text we're reading, you see under there, that's the book. It's literally written, it's been written for 2,500 years. It's there, there's the answer. They trick us. No. It's because of the other people we're oppressing. Yeah, go fight amongst yourself. While we seek the riches and the honors for ourselves. So 2,500 years ago, it was as true then as it is now. Amazing. But we have a way of understanding that, we have a way of addressing it, and we have a way of moving forward. How long it takes the world to catch on to this, I don't know, but we can do it ourselves. So, purification from the troubles caused by the body, globally and within ourselves, at war with ourselves, fighting against ourselves. So you could say we're kind of in one of two dialectics, in the world and within our own selves. We're in a kind of conversation with this, which won't change its mind, telling you you're no good, putting you in a crappy state of mind, so that when you... So using the dialectic, definition, you suck. Demonstration, how does it function towards you? It makes you feel bad about yourself. Division, how do you act in the world when you feel this way? You might self-sabotage yourself. You might undermine your goals. That state of mind might make it harder to reach your most meaningful goals. And then what's the final stage, the fourth stage? Synthesize. You synthesize all of those things, thumbs up, and you analyze it back. You come back to the original definition, synthesis and analysis, that's the return. And you reflect back on the original thought. Did I suck? Do I suck? Yep, it seems I sucked all along, because believing that about myself functioned or demonstrated itself by causing me to feel sad, depressed, lonely, tired, anxious. That's demonstration. And then division. How does it divide out into your world? Well, I tried to do this thing, but I was too tired. I tried to talk to this person, but I was too anxious, and so on and so on. And then from all of those experiences that you have, can you synthesize them to a conclusion about yourself? Yep, I guess it was right the whole time, because look at all of the terrible things that happened to me. I must have been right the whole time. I suck. A self-confirming delusion, a self-confirming negative prophecy about the nature of the self. That's our world. Some of the time we're in this conversation. We have a temporary, we have a respite from that. And then what do? We start asking questions. We start having fun about what the self truly is, about what beauty truly is. And that will lead us into philosophy. All roads lead back to there, because whatever you start asking questions about, I'm really interested in the beauty of art. Eventually you'll have to ask, hang on a second, this beauty that attracts me to art, what is it? Because I want to create art myself. Or I want to find the most beautiful art. Beauty itself. Ooh, that is a movement from the particulars back around to its first cause. The division into beautiful things. So the dialectic is even in reality, even in our evolution. You could say, I'm in the division stage. I'm looking at all of the many different beautiful things, but I can synthesize all of those experiences in the fourth stage and ask a question about what is beauty itself. So when we're freed up from our problems, when we're purified to whatever level from our problems for however long we can be, we're drawn into a dialectic. That's the game of philosophy. Our soul is in a dialectic. Our life is a dialectic. That leads us to questioning, what is beauty itself? What is justice itself? What is excellence? Whatever you're interested in, when you start moving from the particulars to the cause, you synthesize it, go back to the definition. You're asking a philosophical question to do with being. And you might want to ask, well, how do I do that? Oh, let's read the Phaedo. You want to get to self-being? Oh, that's in the Phaedo. Socrates gives you an explanation of how to do it before they killed him. And that's what we're in. So we're playing out a dialectic, either the negative one that causes our repeating cycles of problem, our stagnation, or we're playing the good one, only we're not aware of it. So we're not playing it as good as we could. You might not realize you're in a dialectic that's leading to philosophy until you awaken philosophy in your world. You come across someone like Socrates or like this channel talking about the Phaedo. But as soon as you realize you're in the game, well, you can learn the rules and you can play it well. You can master. In fact, that's what being a philosopher is, seeking excellence. I'm not happy with one beautiful painting. I want the excellence of beauty. What is it? I'm not happy to just be blown around like a leaf in the wind. Maybe I'm going to be sad and play out my problems and be a tyrant myself. Maybe I might happen across some insights in the real dialectic. I'm not happy with that. I want excellence. I want to know the rules of the game and know how to play it well. And bring others and play with others well. I'm sick of gossip or seeking physical things and being Instagram famous or whatever it is. Sick of asking questions about physical things. I'm interested in truth. So let's learn the rules of the game. Also, so we have that question, how do I reach my highest? But we have this question, how do I recognize our problems? The shadow of the dialectic is the cause of our problems, individually and globally. But how do I change? There's two solutions to that change being offered so far in the Phaedo. One, of course, is the purification from the body. You're not going to be interested in physical things if you can physically separate from the body. Physically, you can separate your consciousness, your soul from the body. You're going to be less... That voice that tells you that you suck is going to have less power if you realize, whoa, that can't be true because I'm not even that body. I suck because I'm a man or because I'm a woman or because I'm a this or that. Well, I'm not that. And I know it because I'm out of the body. Not only that, whoever told me that hasn't had this experience, so why the hell am I still listening to that idiot? So the fears and the desires and the illusions and stuff have less of an effect on you. So that's one way of solving our individual problems so we can get into the good game over here. Another thing that's come up, which is where we are in the text, is changing our mind. How do we change our mind? Not through experience or knowledge or nous, but through the other part. Not through the demonstration, but through the definition. These are the two big ones, understanding and experience. Dianoia and nous. The logos and dialectic, the direct intuitive experience of the realm of being. These are the two that were going all the way. These are the two that's missing in this negative dialectic. Belief, faith, images, repeating everything was good the way it was, prejudices, racism, sexism, no understanding, no knowledge. Just like when you look into your reflection in the mirror, if this is has some qualities like the dialectic, similar, but misses the highest, most important things, is not a question about being, so you can't transition to contemplation to have the experience. It's a question about celebrities or about politicians, about who's the best race or nonsense like that. Because missing that is missing the questions directed to being, truth, knowledge, and it's missing the logos. These are images that come up. We don't question them. We just accept them. It's our images. It just feels right. It has, that guy looks like a leader. I would want to have a beer with that guy. Right? The expression I love that I've heard recently from some streamers, they're motivated by colors and shapes. They respond to colors and shapes. Image thinking, we call it in philosophy. Not understanding. Just like when you look at your mirror reflection, again, shadow of the ideal. It's not actually a 3D you. What's it lacking? It has an image, it has color, it has shape. Right? If you're in a, I don't know, if you're in a Batman villain, you could take Batman into a house of mirrors, and if he was motivated by colors and shapes, he could be convinced that start fighting your reflection. But what is our reflection missing? Same things. Intelligence. Knowing, ousia, and also logos, understanding. Your mirror reflection does not have understanding, but you do. Your mirror reflection does not have the direct state of mind, the will, the experience, the knowledge, nous, consciousness. Your mirror reflection fundamentally lacks consciousness. So too, the negative game. Internally, our anti-logos conversation, that usually is the louder voice, by the way, usually shouts louder and feels more believable because we're used to it. And the quieter voice of the self-logos. Socrates says, by the way, that's the voice of the daemon. One of the reasons why he's in prison is because I have a daemon. I've had a spiritual voice that communicates with me providentially through the self-logos. We all do. There's a quieter voice. And then there's a loud beast voice. Ah, you suck. And here are the reasons why. Here are all the divisions, the life experiences that you can synthesize together and analyze back to yourself and realize that you suck. But you know what? You can feel better by saying someone else sucks. If there's only two games, the person telling you that you suck or the person that feels like they suck, then hey, this is what all con artists do, all grifters do. I'm giving you an opportunity to have a temporary alleviation from that suffering by giving you somebody else to pick on, to bully, so you can feel like the big man. You can be the one telling people they suck. And of course, that's just a cycle of violence. No learning. You're the invaded or the invadee. And if we reincarnate, maybe, hey, one lifetime you're being picked on, the other time you're going to be the bully. In our lives, sometimes you get picked on and then you finally get in a position of power in your job or whatever and you start picking on everyone else. Tale as old as time. You're the freshman and you get bullied and then next year you bully the freshman. Same crap. Why? No logos, no nous. No recognition that we're all the same selves on the same quest. Repeating cycles of failure. We want to listen to the quieter voice. We want to separate ourselves from that. Not separate from it by being still in the game, but just being the tyrant. That's not it. That's what's offered to you by all grifters, by all right-wing or conservatives or fascist grifters. I'm not, because I'm saying conservative, not saying therefore the left wing is good. No, it's always this is a shadow. That's their narrative. The truth is, it's a shadow of philosophy. Philosophy is the good. By definition, it's that which leads to the good, self-good. So what? Well, so we don't want to change our mind by perpetuating the cycle, just being the bully. That's the stagnation, repetition of suffering internally and externally. We want to change our mind fundamentally. And Socrates says this is how you demonstrate it. This is how you pull off this. You do this thing through the mastery of the dialectic and the logos. You can separate yourself together from all parts of your soul as much as you can, out of your body, out of the body. Collect yourself together as much as possible. Don't fly around the room. Don't become a spiritual tourist, as they say. Collect yourself together as much as you can, continuing to do the dialectic, therefore. And to remain there as long as you can, both now and in the future. Keep playing the game. The best game, the only game really. Everything else you're doing because you think that activity is good. Oh, it's going to be good if I do this. And then you realize slowly, well, hang on a second. The good is this thing in being. So shouldn't I not waste my time in doing this activity to lead to that activity, Why don't I just jump to the end? That's a kind of bringing yourself together, collecting yourself together, unifying your purpose, unifying your direction. As soon as you realize everything you do is to make yourself happier, more good, more beneficial, more beautiful, then why not jump to the good, beautiful, just itself? That's philosophy. It's exactly what it is. So it's a kind of unification of your purpose. Unification of purpose and direction. Unification of purpose, direction, and functioning. Justice. The virtue of justice. That you have to practice. Practice to. And once you realize this, well, yeah, it's not going to be familiar. It's not going to be what you're used to. But again, you have to change your mind. Act differently now that you've learned that. But it feels like the other things are more easy or more familiar, or more comfortable or more better. Even though my logos, my understanding shows me that it's not true. How do I follow what the logos says, even though everything else is saying otherwise? That's the definition of the virtue of courage. It's not courageous to, charge at the army on your own. That's stupid. You need understanding. You need to understand why it's good, that it's good. Otherwise, it's foolishness. So courage necessarily requires the logos, requires understanding of what's good. Why would it be good to charge the army? It's not. Oh, okay, then don't do it. That's not courage. That's the stupidity. Courage requires following what you understand is necessarily the best course of action. That's logos. Seeking that and not chasing after every other activity until you finally realize that this is the right one, doing the right one, not because you are familiar with it, because you naturally seek it, but because the logos says it's the best thing you should desire. That's the virtue of temperance or sound-mindedness. And the third virtue, wisdom. It's the learning of the logos, of what you should desire and what you should follow. Those are the three virtues. When you have the three virtues, they come together so that you can do, if you're doing that at all times, that's the virtue of justice. Socrates is saying that's what you have to be doing as well. He brought in the virtues of justice, the four virtues. And they're all to do with the logos. The very thing this negative cycle is lacking. The negative dialectic, the stagnant dialectic, the anti-self dialectic. Which is interesting because the true dialectic is following the logos, the self-logos, leading you to see the divinity of yourself. Your soul is immortal. He just told us. And he's saying, hey, you got to experience it too and understand why it's the case. So not only do you not suck, you are immortal and divine of the nature of that realm of being. You can join with being. That's contemplation. But not only that, you might be beyond the divine. The most heretical thing you can say if you listen to the con artists in this negative one. Because God is the best and you have to follow what we tell you God says. Which is actually what we say, but forget about that. I mean, other religions confuse the word of God, but this religion is the right one. And it always says you can't be greater than God. But if the self-logos realizes your self-divine, self-being, and even the realm of self-being is somehow of a reflection of the one self, then you're greater than God. Oh my God. That's the game. That's where we're heading. That's where the dialectic will lead us to. Through trust, via the virtues, developed through understanding. And then he's saying, hey, if you understand why those things are true, through the logos and dialectic, you become most like nous, most like that experience of self-ousia, self-being. And then there's a kind of spiritual initiation where the divine self, initiates you into the direct experience, and then you can develop the true virtues, where you're not doing sound-mindedness, courage, wisdom, and doing it at all times justice. You're not doing the forward virtues in a way that can be difficult, but because you're there, you naturally seek beauty. You don't have to tell someone, hey, like beautiful things. Well, you don't have to convince me, bud. That's what beauty is. Hey, seek healthy and good things. You don't have to tell me. Of course we're going to eat good food. No one's going to eat poison. So when you actually have that experience, which is why he calls it true mysticism, many of the people who call themselves mystics, but only the true philosophers are the actual mystics, allows for a kind of spiritual initiation through this riddle. Remember, it's an intellectual riddle. We're trying to figure it out. We're Sherlock Holmeses up in here. The virtues upgrade. Let me play the sound. No, we don't. The virtues upgrade into the true virtues. Those who are familiar with the symposium will recognize this at the end of the symposium too. Recognize what? When you're able to attain or have that experience of true being out of your body through the development of the logos and dialectic, and purifying yourself from that loud bestial voice trying to get you to stay conforming in the ignorance cycle of violence and suffering. You can silence that, purify yourself from that, and you can actually have that experience. In the symposium also, it talks about the transition from being able to develop the true virtues. Not holding on to what the logo says despite your desires, despite your fears, but because you are there, because you've gotten there, naturally you'll desire it. Naturally you'll hold on to the truth in the ups and downs. People who've had near-death experiences talk about that. They talk about feeling like, oh, I'm not afraid of the things I used to be afraid of anymore. Specifically death. Because I've had this near-death experience where I separated from my body for a amount of time, and I realized, oh, I'm not mortal. I'm not just physical. Very common. But we want to get there through understanding and practice. Often, as much as we can. For as long as we can, both now and in the future. Bringing with us the development of our virtues. So we have to go there through the logos, because the logos is what motivates what we practice. Right? You don't start knowing everything. You don't start desiring the truth. You have to do it through practice and, habits, he says. But when we get there, the habits will pay off and will upgrade to true virtue, says Socrates in his doctrine. So, to pull that off, it's easy to do that the less we have this loud, noisy, anti-logos dialectic happening, which means we want to separate from that. If we can separate the body, that's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it, so that's the experience, but what's the other half of the game? Understanding. Can we change our mind not just through realizing it's not true because you experience a more true level of your own self? So therefore, of course, it's wrong. And My teachers had no idea about that. My ma or pa or whoever was your surrogate parent when you were young and first learning these beliefs, priest, teacher, whoever, had no idea about this. So not only are they wrong, but in principle, they couldn't have been right. That can help. But another way of doing it is through understanding, not just through experience, but understanding. Demonstration and definition. So, how do we change our mind through understanding? Because those con artists, the ones who have the sign, hey, this is my prejudice, change my mind. That's that meme that's been around for ages. And the irony is they never change their mind because they can't follow the logos. They're not interested in the logos. They're interested in justifying the prejudice they already hold. That's the nature of conservatism. That's the nature of grifters. They're not open to learning. Sophists, we call them in philosophy. They make their money by appearing knowing, as a saying. It's very hard to change the mind of somebody whose income, profession and status is defined by being a knower, or is based on is dependent on not changing their mind and therefore having the right opinions. That's the irony of people who have whose situation and positions are based on them knowing everything, so therefore they've got a lot of interest in not changing their mind. So what would be the alternative? How do we change our mind? Is there a principle and structure of what we follow that should change our mind? Because Simmias and Cebes are saying, hey, I like what you're saying about philosophy, but this is what we think about the soul, change our mind. How does Socrates do it? And they've said, look, I trust you, I'm a good faith actor. Unlike the grifters, the tyrants. So as we're learning the dialectic, as we go through, by seeing how Socrates relates to these people and how they, Simmias and Cebes, and how they respond, not only are we learning the dialectic, we're interested in the dialectic because it shows us how we can change our mind, and therefore should be the principle in everything. Because someone goes through this argument, they need to change their mind. Otherwise, they are limited, blocked, and therefore should not be in the position of power that they're in. Or if there is some principle of, this is the dialectic, and at this stage you have shown that this hypothesis must be so, and this one isn't, if you hold on what has been shown through the dialectic to not be true, you are stuck. If you ignore that and continue to function from that ignorance, that's corruption. Thumbs up. And therefore, we shouldn't tolerate that. Tolerate people who are not following the logos, who are not able to change their mind and learn, stagnant. Because that's why we keep repeating this. It's why the pages of human history are soaked in blood. We're not learning. Look at the big conflicts around the world right now. Is it almost comical in its absurdity of how they're just doing what was done to them, to others? Or repeating what they did in the past again? In other words, no learning, self-confirmation of what their false beliefs they have already. So this is why we're interested in the dialectic too, to change our minds. And yep, it might feel different. And there might be a big, loud, noisy voice in our head saying, no, difference is bad, change is bad. Stick with what you're used to. You know how to walk in the world in that way. You know how to manipulate people with that mask on. You know how to earn money with that fake status or whatever. Don't change. I benefit from the injustice in some way, and I like that. True, that's going to come until we're able to purify ourselves from that. But in spite of that, we still have to change our mind if the logo says we should. That's the virtues. That's courage, learning that logos is wisdom, doing what it says despite your fears and desires and pleasures and pains. That's courage. Desiring that is true temperance, true sound-mindedness. That's the 3 virtues. And hey, doing it at all times, applying that logos and dialectic to that voice, and in your pursuit of excellence, to everyone you meet, at whatever level you're able to, at whatever level they can share in it. That's the 4th virtue of justice. So that's what we're doing. We want to change our mind, and we want to have that through which we can apply our virtues, because that makes us close to the initiation. And when that happens, we'll take our practice of these virtues with us, and they'll upgrade. Wow. To the true virtues, the effortless virtues, the flow state virtues. And that's a level of enlightenment, of course. So, if that's what we want, what do we want? To get close enough to that initiation experience, let's have a quote. It's good to have quotes as we go. Here's one from Socrates that we read. While we live, we shall be closest to knowing when we neither associate nor commune with the body more than is necessary. We must purify ourselves from it until the divine self should liberate us. The liberation by the divine part of our own self. Notice self, honorific, but also us. It's like if you were the 2D reflection in your mirror, you have to sort of do what you have to wait for the 3D self to move its hand before you can move your hand, because you're the reflection. Kind of like that. But of course, we are the reflection from our higher level of ourselves. Which is why that negative logos diminishes when we actually remember the higher part of ourselves. And that's what Socrates has been saying, remembering. That's where we're at the text. One of the ways of proving our soul is immortal is that showing that everything we learn is through remembering. Meaning we have to have learned it at some time before we were a mirror version, before we were a physical world version. And that can't have been in the physical world, therefore our soul has an existence in the other, after death and before birth. So, we should be closest to having that knowing experience when we don't commune with the body. We purify ourselves till the divine self should liberate us, and thus being purified, having been liberated from the phronesis, big question mark, what's that? Of the body, some sort of phronesis is the 5th virtue, the mysterious divine virtue, that the upgraded virtue that can be directed to the body. We shall likely be with a kind and know that is pure. Okay, that's fine. Here we go. Here's another quote. That quote's good because it brings in the idea of purifying ourselves, being receptive, which of course is the questions. You have a question, you're engaging your intellect, but you're also in a state of mind. Those are the 2 big ones, understanding and state of mind. What state of mind are you with a question? Focused. That might be phronesis, maybe focus. Curious, open, receptive, wondering. You're not fiercely and blindly loyal to what you already know. I don't have a question, I have all the answers. That's the negative logos. And my answers is you suck. The self logos or the self mind or oneself sucks. Essentially, inadequate. Heathen, original sin, not good enough, not divine. Right? The opposite of that is questions. Opposite of those negative answers that we're blindly loyal to, questions. So what are we? Open, receptive, curious. So we have questions as we go. Here we go. Questions about what? These sorts of things. Self-justice, self-beauty, self-good. The ousia of all selves and beings is contemplated. The ultimate upgrade of our question. Not through the body, but whoever prepares themselves by most accurately dianoia, understanding, each self-investigated, those selves, will approach the closest to the nous, the intuitive knowledge of each being. That's why we're doing that. So that's one reason, because in learning the dialectic and mastering the dialectic and practicing the dialectic, we are preparing ourselves for that, which is one reason. The other reason is by doing the dialectic and logos, we have what we need to practice the virtues. You can't hold on to the truth from logos until you find the truth in logos. You can't desire it. That's courage. You can't desire it for temperance until you have it. You can't hold on to it as your model, wisdom, until you have it. And you can't use it at all times, justice. Those are the 4 virtues until you have it. So we want the experience. We want the logos, so we can practice the virtues, so that when we do have that experience, we can make it our own. It's not just a trip at a rave. It's not a one-off experience. We integrate our virtues. We use that to inform our virtues, to level up the virtues and level up ourselves. That's the spiritual evolution. And of course, we can use the dialectic to map our spiritual evolution. Recognize the levels. Because the logos is the paradigm for everything, including the paradigm of our spiritual evolution. So once we're in that game, we have the virtues and the experience, we have the logos and the nous, we can map the levels. And of course, there is a loose map that we can borrow that can be handy for a while at least. The 10 ox herding pictures. 10 ox herding pictures are Buddhist pictures of a man discovering, taming, riding a bull or an ox. There's a picture, there's a poem, and there's an explanation for each level to represent the levels of spiritual enlightenment. The first 2 are ignorance. The next 8 are 8 levels of spiritual enlightenment. Of course, Buddhism, that's their game. They want to progress through levels of enlightenment. And these pictures are a handy map to use, at least until as a guide until we're able to nail down the true map of the logos. So, why are we doing this thing, all this effort and work and interest and practice and coming back to these talks, coming back to these podcasts, coming back to these texts? We want the experience, number 1. That's the big one. You want to get there. You don't send your slave to the banquet. You want to eat the beautiful meal yourself. Have that experience. That's the purification for that experience. Number 2, you need the logos for your virtues, to practice, to become a better human being. And also, so when you have that experience, you have what you need to upgrade those virtues to the flow states. And of course, there'll be levels of that flow state, level of enlightenment, levels of spiritual growth that we can also use the logos to map. We'll use the ox herding pictures as a guide as we go. But again, everything that we read is going to have some logos and anti-logos mixed in by the author. Unless, of course, they've recognized the dialectic in the logos and sufficiently purified their anti-logos. And philosophy is the only tradition that has that. And after Socrates, there's a question of how well their understanding of purifying their pathologos is. But doesn't matter because we have it. We can recognize it. We have philosophical midwifery, so we can recognize the dialectic we're learning for these things also applies to a way of purifying our false logos. But for other people, not so much, which isn't a criticism, it's just the way it is. So while there might be a level of logos in the ox herding pictures, we'll have to recognize, okay, if their tradition, their Buddhist tradition, didn't have the self-logos, didn't have the dialectic, they might miss some things, or their instructions might be a bit vague because they don't know how to get there. They can recognize it because it's about experience in Buddhism, but not understanding so much, so they might not be able to give good instruction. At any rate, we could use it as a guide until we apply our logos and dialectic to it. And we're going to jump back into the Parmenides after the Phaedo. It's going to help in that quest. So, why do we do the dialectic? To have the experience, number 1. Number 2, to have the logos so we can use for our virtues and develop to make sense of that experience. And also to map that experience. So as we go beyond that experience, develop the virtues, develop the map. And third, we're learning what it means to change our mind. Because while it's easy to look at people very attached to their traditions and will never change their mind and will go to war against people who say they should change their mind. No. What we believed 2,000 years ago about God, that's always going to be true forever and ever and ever. Well, what about this contradiction in the words? Shouldn't that mean you change your mind? No, it means you should stop reading the book. It means you're a nerd. Screw you, nerd. Punch in the face. Right? Maybe seeing an inherent contradiction is part of the dialectic process to reflect on the subject in a new way such that you do change your mind. So we don't want to be, it's easy to point at people who are very fiercely loyal and grew up with and attached to their ignorance, but also we have that too. We're all humans. We all have a question about our negative logos and a question about the self logos. Two kinds of questions. And we can represent the principles that apply to both with mythology. Make stories about it. This is a story about it. There'll be a mythology that says, hey, this is what God was like. One day God said, all men are awesome and all women suck. And then he said, you are the chosen people. And those people over there with different skin color, you need to kill them because they're the devil. Wow, that's an interesting story or mythology. I'm going to derive a certain belief about myself and the world and the virtues, what it means to be good and just and holy. And I'm going to be fiercely loyal to it and defend it forever. Because very rarely do these religious mythologies say, and then God said, by the way, everything I said is fundamentally wrong. Because you can always improve on it. And I don't know it all myself. So you got to make sure you listen to the logos and not me. I've never heard that. And these people who put themselves in authority who said, these are the beliefs you have to, they're all going to be corrupt. So overthrow any authority. I've never seen a religion or a cult like that. Except for, of course, philosophy, which is not religion, because religion is to be bound. The word religios is, the definition is bound by a saving belief. So it's easy to point at them who are comically, who mythologize it comically, but we also have it. So we have to develop a question and apply our dialectic and logos to that, because hey, all through life we're going to be having that conversation. That voice will come up. How do we approach it? Shut up, you. The voice comes, oh, don't do that. You're not going to be good enough. Do we turn around and say, no, you're not good enough, and we get into a fight? Or can we use our understanding of the logos to dialectic with it? Oh, by the way, let's have a look at whether that's true or not. Let's go through the definition, demonstration, division, and analysis. Synthesis analysis. Oh, and you can't change your mind, even though the logo says it's not true? Now we're in a different question. What then is the cause of your ignorance such that you can't change your mind when faced with the logos? Midwife ourselves. Who convinced you of this false belief? Because they didn't use the logos and dialectic. Because if they did, you should be able to change your mind. So a different kind of a dialectic. Why? Because while the definition is the cause of the demonstration, and that's the cause of its divisions, and that's the cause of our conclusion, you can trace the causal chain back up to see who was the first person who convinced you suck in that way, such that it's unable to change its mind. So a different use of the dialectic to show why this voice doesn't change its mind. Why it's so loud and bestial. So, that's a fun thing we can do. And of course, we recognize it's the same thing. Like, we're either in that conversation or we're in this conversation. Maybe we can silence it for long enough, either through the experience of separating from the body or from that dialogue. Hey, shut up because, or ask these questions so that we can get back into the true game that we should be playing at all times. Those are the virtues. And have fun. Develop a good state of being. Develop the virtues. Develop our understanding. Develop that experience of the high dimensions of reality. Hey, if there are high dimensions of reality, why not check them out? If you learned that you were a mirror reflection of another part of yourself, do you want to stay at the lower level? I don't think anyone would. I mean, this voice will tell you, no, you have to stay at your lower level. Why? Oh, because of fear, because the devil is there, or you're not good enough. Bullshit. Literally bullshit. It's irrational. Does not follow the logos. Because we desire the good. We want the highest good. There might be a certain kind of purification from the power of that voice, the influence of that voice, to seek it at all times, to love it, or not to fear it, so we can embrace it and recognize it. That's another thing why we do the dialectic and logos, to recognize it when it happens. You don't want to dismiss it. You might have this experience. Wow, I experienced, someone came along. No, you were just on drugs. No, well, actually, it wasn't. It may or may not have been influenced by drugs, but I was doing the dialectic and it fits rational. No. That's just brain chemicals. Oh no, that's just you've got mental illness. Or even worse. Oh no, that's Mother Mary touching you, and that actually proves the religion. That was Allah. That was Moses. Yeah, that was Moses. Ooh. Don't want it. And this use of higher states of understanding or experience to solidify your problems, Socrates pointed out in his doctrine. That's the vices. The vices, to do your vices well, isn't to be apathetic. You need a level of intelligence, you need a level of will, you need a level of understanding, you need a level of clarity of sight to pursue your vices well. The biggest tyrants have a lot of the good qualities, but they don't have the logos. They don't have the rest of the virtues. They don't have the logos and dialectics, so they might master some of the pleasures to be mastered by others. Right? We've been talking about mastering your gambling problem so you can spend more money on drinking. That's a level of kind of excellence, kind of. Oh, that's a nice way of understanding phronesis. He said that's a kind of phronesis, temperance through intemperance, or a kind of sound-mindedness through licentious, like grossness or vice. So maybe a placeholder word for our mystery. We have got a question: what the heck is phronesis? If that's part of what we're after, if that's the ultimate currency that we trade all our virtues in for self-phronesis, if that's what we're after, Socrates has been saying, hey, philosopher loves truth, which is the logos and nous of being. That's what truth is, self-being. But also we love phronesis, which is a kind of more divine virtue that we trade the other virtues in for. So we've been holding a question all the way through: what the heck is phronesis? Well, one quality to add in that sack, we talked about focus. Like we can focus on the body, the kind of phronesis on the body, and Socrates saying we need to separate ourselves from the phronesis of the body, this one here. So we could say that's some sort of focus or attention. But also, if he says there's a kind of, let's bring up the text to show it. If there's a kind of phronesis based on intemperance, then we could say there's a kind of excellence. Why? You master, to master some pleasures to be mastered by others. So you master your gambling problem so you can become a more excellent drinker. Excellence kind of fits in that context. Let's pull it up. So here is this: those who practice philosophy correctly are studying to die and fear death least. We want to have our soul itself by itself. All their life they yearn for this is the wrong thing. Here we are. Whoops. Where is it? Here we go. So these are the highlighted parts. Those who practice philosophy correctly, says Socrates in his doctrine, are studying to die and fear death least. They are desirous to have their soul on its own, self by self. Throughout their life they yearn for phronesis. So we might not quite know what it is, but Socrates is saying that's what we're really after. One who is true a lover of phronesis. So we're not just a lover of wisdom, which is something to do with the logos and experience of, well, logos and nous of self-being. So we can use it as a paradigm or a model for everything we do, which is wisdom. So phronesis becomes, philosophia, love of wisdom, becomes lover of mindfulness. So maybe that's part of the upgrade. Pure mindfulness. You're a true philosopher is someone who wants pure mindfulness, not directed to the body. Of course, if you are not in this game, you're a lover of the body, which manifests as a lover of riches or honors or both. Here we go. So then he talked about you're not really courageous if you're only accepting, if you run to your death because you're afraid of losing worse things or afraid of other things or because you have to. That's not true courage. You need the logos and you need nous, logos of being, knowledge of being, to know it's good. Equally so, to master certain pleasures is the simple-minded experience of sound-mindedness. That's the first virtue, sophrosune. It's hard to translate into English, sophrosune. Temperance, sound-mindedness, those are the two big ones. Old English would say prudence, but that's a different meaning now. Simple-minded kind of sound-mindedness. Master some pleasures to be mastered by others. This, they have been made temperate by a lack of temperance. There's one translation. The actual Greek is they have been made phronesis by vice, or the word is licentiousness, by vulgar behavior. So a kind of inverted commas phronesis. So we could say you master your gambling so you can be really good at drinking. Well, you've been made a kind of phronesis. So one word that kind of fits there that we're going to take as a hypothesis to help understand the big question, what the heck is this phronesis we're supposed to be a lover of, is excellence. Why? You've been made more excellence at drinking. You're better at it. And we seek excellence. So that kind of makes sense. If we seek pure phronesis or self-phronesis, one of the big things of being a philosopher that gets you into the game is seeking excellence. Which is like, hey, I don't just want good experiences, I want the best experience. Which is truth, being yourself. I don't just want to understand things, I want the best understanding. I don't just want to be moved by shapes and colors. I want the best cognitive functioning. Logos and nous. Seeking excellence. I just don't want to follow an idea of justice, a belief about justice. I want to experience justice itself. I don't want to just be pushed around like a leaf in the wind. I want to learn the rules so I can play excellently. That's the dialectic. Learn the rules of the game. The rules that the bad voices, the pathologos is telling us. Learn how it's manipulating me to cause my problems and my feelings of negative thoughts and inadequacy. But also want to learn how to climb the ladder to enlightenment. So, to start the game, excellence. Whatever it is you're interested in. And that's what we've actually seen that in the arguments last time of Socrates saying, hey, that's the purpose of physical things. You see two sticks, they look equal because they yearn for the excellence of equalness. They yearn to be self-equal, even sticks, but they also serve a purpose to remind us that we seek this equal things. Because you show someone two sticks, look at these equal sticks. To another person looking from a different angle, doesn't look equal to me. Hang on a second. If the sticks don't have it because you didn't see it, where did I get this idea of equal? Must have been in the realm of being, must have been before my physical experiences. And Socrates says, hey, all things, we're going to read that soon, all things in the physical world are the same because that's their purpose. To remind you of the excellence. How many beautiful things until you start asking the question, what is beauty itself? How many activities do you want to dedicate your life to until you recognize, I only do it because I think it's good for me and it's going to benefit me? How many physical things are you going to chase until you realize that we have a body that you can't take them with you? Excellence. So, excellence, we talked about, is a way into the game. This is us.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Seeking excellence is at the top. Key terms, hypothesis questions. And right now we're talking about, okay, so what are we? Look for key terms, specifically the self terms, right? And we talked about today how, well, one of the reasons why is because, because the self terms are the terms that you can, when your concentration becomes meditation, becomes contemplation, you can join with them because self terms are the aspects of being. They have ousia. And of course, this reflecting on ourselves to understand ourselves that we do through the dialectic is ousia, which is most like the essence of being. Look for key terms, so justice, beauty, and goodness. We often talk about those. We have a question. Put them in our question section. This is our inventory, by the way. So the archetype of the hero's journey, the archetype of the video game. So, just like you have an inventory, you might have different sections in your inventory. Of course, we have skill trees, which are the patterns. Look for patterns of 4. We notice there are 4 categories of the dialectic. There are also 4 virtues, so there might be a relationship between them. There's also a 5 skill tree because if you add phronesis, there's a mysterious 5th virtue. So we have skill trees, just like in a video game. You weave all your ideas together with the sewing needle of infinite truths. That's our main weapon. So we have all these notes, all these questions, all these key terms. We have developed a mythology of whatever we understand, learning of the dialectic. We sew them together with the sewing needle of infinite truths. Helps us gain more insights. So we have a big question in our question stack. What the heck is this phronesis? If we really are after phronesis, if we upgrade from a lover of learning, philomathesis, to a lover of wisdom, philosophy, and then we upgrade from a philosopher to a philophronesis, what the heck is phronesis? So that's a big question. One hypothesis about phronesis that we're carrying in our if sac, which is a hypothesis. Understanding is always a hypothesis because it's only a hypothesis until you confirm it in the contemplation and in the direct experience. So we develop hypotheses. One hypothesis about what phronesis is maybe it's excellence, or excellence is a part of it. Because that quote we just read. They have been made mindful by a lack of discipline. The word is vice, really. Better drinker by mastering their gambling. More excellent. So maybe there is a kind of, just as we said that there's a shadow In the lower levels, that's the emanation. We have a 2D reflection in the mirror. There is a shadow of the dialectic. That's the cause of the problems. Internally, that negative, that inner critic, sometimes people call it. But also our world, fascists, conservators, loosely, whether they know it or not, whether it's PC to say it or not. Tyrants, those who use the dialectic but do not learn, do not change their mind, but use a kind of shadow of the dialectic as a self-confirming, hey, look at all, we're going to treat this race poorly. We're going to make them poor, so they have to do crime. Oh, look, they're doing crime. We were right all along. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Internally, the same thing. That's the nature of grifts and tyrants and people who think it's good to invade another country. They use nationalism and racism and chauvinism and sexism and all these sorts of isms, which is our group good, everybody else from the other cave bad, which is a remnant of our evolution as human beings. Served a purpose, but is a cause of our problems until we realize it's a shadow of the dialectic. It doesn't ousia and then roll up. It's a stagnant. You remain entrenched in your pathologos and you go to war for it. You start conflict and you kill people for it and so on and so on. You suffer yourself. People who live this way, even tyrants, have an internal conflict. So, just like there is a shadow of the dialectic, and mythology can apply to both, the same principles, mythologize in your stories, maybe there's a shadow of excellence up here. Maybe one loose hypothesis for what is phronesis is excellence. And as Socrates says, we want to purify ourselves from the phronesis of the body. Where's that? Here we go, this quote here. At the end of it, having been liberated from the phronesis of the body, we purify ourselves. And in that quote that we just read, here, you have been made phronesis by a lack of discipline. And just for fun, just because we can, let's go to that section that we pulled out from the Republic that also mentioned phronesis, and also, so in this text we read, there's so where is it? An outline of a shadow. Because why? The only true currency that you exchange things for isn't pleasures for pleasures, gambling for alcoholism. It's phronesis, the only valid currency. So being, energy, virility, sound-mindedness, and courage, and justice. True virtue when you unite that with phronesis. So these virtues we've been developing, being, so wisdom is the logos of being. Virile is when you can act with your courage. Sound-mindedness, seeking the logos within all parts of your soul, seeking it, desiring it, doing it at all times. Justice. These, when you reach this pure mindfulness, you unite these virtues we've been developing with phronesis, upgrades them. It's a rite of initiation. That's a kind of riddle that we have to solve, which will help purify and perfect us, not just in this life, but in the afterlife too, so that we don't end up in the mud when we die. Even in our practice, while we're alive of dying, we don't want to end up in the mud. We want to bring the virtues with us, because true philosophy is being an inspired mystic. So, outline of a shadow. And so maybe the ultimate virtue that we use the virtues for phronesis has its outline and shadow too. So let's bring up again, let's revisit Book 7 of the Republic, because we talked about the shadow of courage, the vice version of courage, and the vice version of sound-mindedness. In Book 7 of the Republic, he talks about the vice virtue of wisdom, the third one. And he also talks about learning. So we're in the text in the Phaedo, we're at the level where we're learning and we're understanding learning, understanding it as remembering, as a way to change our mind about our souls. Many of us are like Simius and Cebes, and like what Socrates said, makes a lot of sense, has an integrity about it, has a beauty to it, relates to near-death experiences and yogas and Eastern spiritual and all these, it relates, brings everything together beautifully. But we kind of still think that, kind of like we're half remembering it. There's a part of us that still wants to be convinced that we have an immortal soul. And so we're on, he's using the idea of learning to show, well, we have to have learned it somewhere. So this section here, let's, Jarvis, are you there?
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Jarvis.
Bring up the 7th book of the Republic, because it talks about the vice version of wisdom, the mirror reflection of wisdom, but he also talks about learning.
Importing all preferences from home interface. Systems are now fully operational.
Thank you, Jarvis. Okay. So let's read this part and see if we can find anything to help that we can sew in with our understanding of the Phaedo to help us as we go. Socrates says to Glaucon, "Surely then, if this is true, our consideration concerning selves must be the following, that education is not something that those proclaim it is, or as those who proclaim it say it is." So our teachers, even back then, the teachers, the authorities who tell us what learning is, thought this way, as they do today. Interesting. Somehow we were stagnant. We haven't evolved through the learning of Socrates. We cut it off and we became stagnant because what he is saying is the problem back then is still now. So anyone who says, oh, don't read Plato and Socrates because they're so old. They didn't even have the internet back then. They didn't even have medical science. Well, they did, but not as good as us. So surely we would have gotten better because that's evolution. You can say, well, actually, no. We got off the dialectic. We didn't listen to Socrates. We, in fact, killed him. And we got into our perpetual cycle of stagnation and vice, the vice dialectic, because we still have the same problems. So you can't use that as a way of dismissing it and hold on to your prejudices that you got from your culture. We have to go back to where we left off, which is what we're doing here, and continue the conversation. Life is a conversation. History is a conversation. And the conversation happens through the dialectic. Go back to where our conversation left off. So, education is not such a thing as some who proclaim it say it is, teachers back then. They say that since there is no innate knowledge in the soul, they somehow insert it, as if they were inserting sight into blind eyes. Glaucon says, yep, so they say. But the present logos indicates that this same innate power does exist in the soul of everyone. Oh. Wow. Including the organ. So we have an organ, we have an eye in our soul. The sixth sense, by which everyone does learn, just as if the eye were unable to see in any other way other than being turned around. Along with the whole body from the darkness towards the light. Okay, so the whole body, he's talking about the cave analogy. So, of course, we are separating from the body in the Phaedo, but the analogy of the cave, the prisoners that are attached to their physical senses can't see that the shadows are being put on the wall of the cave. They're imprisoned. And they have to climb up the cave to go into the real world, the world of being. But they can't even move their neck, so they have to turn their whole body around and begin the journey. So we recognize, okay, yeah, turn the whole soul, not actually the body, but that's to do with the cave analogy that came just before. Okay. Turn towards the light. Also, this organ must be turned along with the whole soul. Collect your whole soul together. Interesting. From the place of becoming towards that place of being, the place of being, until she may be able to endure the contemplation. There's our contemplation. So this preparation through the dialectic to endure the contemplation of being. So we have to practice it so we can endure it. It might be overwhelming to suddenly come into the light, and like when you have been gaming all night in the dark and then it's midday and you open your curtains and whoa, it could be hard to endure the sunlight. Endure the contemplation of the most brilliant light of being. In this way, and this we say is the good. So goodness is in there. Of course, they say it's the good, but he goes on to point out it's not the good itself. That's even beyond, but that's a different puzzle. That's a puzzle that we're going to get when we get into the Republic. But at least we can say there's goodness there. This then shall be the art of, Glaucon says yes. This then shall be the art of turning about this of self. In what way it shall be turned with the greatest ease and effectiveness. How do we turn it? How do we get there? Like, how do we do it most easily and effectively? Not to implant in ourself the power to see, but on the other hand, by considering that self already possesses the power to see, but to contrive a way to accomplish this turning about, since, on the one hand, self was not properly arranged, by not looking to those which you should be. From the Phaedo, we recognize he's talking about we're chasing the body. Riches, honors, physical perceptions, physical pleasures and pains and fears and desires. So this proper arrangement of our soul we call the virtues. Desiring to look at the realm of being through the logos. Sound-mindedness. Right? Not the vice version of sound-mindedness where you're still looking to the things that you shouldn't be. Still looking at the beers. Glaucon says yes. It's reasonable. Now then, says Socrates, on the one hand, the other so-called virtues of the soul are likely to be in some way akin to those of the body, for, in reality, they do not exist in the soul before, but are produced in her later by habits and practice. Got to put them in. But on the other hand, the true virtue or excellence, here's our hypothesis, excellence, of phronesis. Interesting. We had a hypothesis that one word to describe phronesis could be excellence, and we just had a nice, interesting confirmation in the text. Interesting how the Logos is unfolding back upon us to help us in our quest. Interesting. What do you say, Owen?
Wow.
Wow. Wow.
So there is a kind of excellence and virtue so the fifth virtue as well, of presence of mind, or phronesis, that happens to be more divine than all the others, as it never loses its power. It's more divine. It doesn't run out, which is good because it's somehow to do with immortality. You run out of physical power in the physical world, but something of phronesis doesn't lose its power, which tells us something. It's something to do with that immortal soul, something to do with something more divine part of us. Eternal, immortal, doesn't lose its and powerful. A God level virtue. So, never loses its power, but depending on which way it's drawn. Socrates talked about bring up the quote. Liberate from, in the Phaedo, 67a, liberated from phronesis of the body. So really sewing it together with our sewing needle of infinite truths between the two texts, that it does agree. Right? Liberate from, we can direct the phronesis to the body. So, back to the book 7. It never loses its power, making it more divine, but according to that, the which way it is drawn becomes useful and beneficial, or useless and harmful. Can hurt us or not. So this really helps us with our theory that there is a virtue and vice version of things. Virtue and vice version of course, sound-mindedness, to be a better drunk, but of the dialectic. There's a vice version of the self-logos, the one that tells you that you suck. There's a vice version of the dialectic that doesn't change your mind and evolve upwards, but becomes a stagnant, self-fulfilling prophecy. Endless cycles of war, causing the pages of human history to be soaked in blood. Right? I love the philosophy podcast, so this is not a dig, but sometimes the other philosophy podcasts that or YouTube videos that I see, they kind of go around in circles, that no one changes their mind. They don't come together and unify in a ousia that can develop. They become stagnant. But there is a beauty in how they talk about their personal opinions, but it's not philosophy, the way Socrates is defining it, the way it is. Okay. Hope I don't offend anybody. Useless and harmful. So, you can have a vice version of phronesis. And of course, it's not a dig at those people. I just want to make that clear. It's just what naturally follows until we reawaken philosophy. Thus, the need to reawaken philosophy, the logos and dialectic. It's not me saying this, it's just Socrates. We're just reading it. All we're doing is reading. Did I save my ass? So, become useful and beneficial, the good dialectic, the good side, or its vice version, useless and harmful, does harm. Or the grifters that does harm with their hate women, make money, get Bugattis, bullshit philosophy. That's not actual philosophy. They might be very good at it, very focused, have a kind of excellence at conning people, but it does harm. Right? Or have you not yet brought to mind, on the other hand, those who are said to be worthless, here we go, but on the other hand, wise, the worthless wise man. First, by how sharply the little soul looks out for itself. Oh yeah, those grifters, they own the money, don't they? And secondly, how precisely it clearly sees. So there's a looking out for yourself, a clear seeing, the things to which it has been directed. So it has no contemptible sight, it has great sight. Thus it is compelled to be subservient to depravity. So much more accurately it sees, by that much more it does its work at vice. So this anti-phronesis, this anti-virtue, this vice, some people who develop this anti-phronesis directed to the body become harmful. They seem to be wise, but they can just clever. They're clever. They look out for themselves. And they can see things well. They have good sight. In another text it says it can think well. It has a kind of understanding, a kind of, the negative kind of understanding, but it's directed to the body. So therefore, they get better at depravity. And they're subservient. They are themselves enslaved. They are, in a way, victims, which is interesting because one of the cons is to claim they're a victim whenever they're challenged. But in a way, they are a victim to their ignorance, to their false allegiance, at their blind devotion to a stagnant belief about what's good, because they haven't awoken philosophy. They haven't graduated from philosomatos, love of the body, to philomathesis, love of learning. What kind of learning? Philosophia, philosophy, which ultimately culminates as what? Philophronesis, love of pure self-phronesis. Therefore, they have the vice version of wisdom. And just like the vice version of sound-mindedness gives you a kind of vice version of phronesis, body phronesis, body excellence at being depraved, equally to here. The vice version of wisdom gives you a kind of phronesis directed towards depravity. So we have to purify ourselves from the body so that everything that, when we get better at seeing, when we get better at mastering our pleasures and desires, get better at being courageous, get better at thinking, we apply it to where it should be. Self-logos, self-being, and the one self. That triad of the self. And we have the upgrade. And part of that spiritual initiation upgrade is purifying from body phronesis to true phronesis, pure phronesis. And as we saw in the quote, makes sense because it's only logical that the pure can be with the pure. The rest of this quote, it's only through being ourselves pure then we can know that which is pure. So pure isn't being like, I don't know. Isn't hating yourself for having pleasures or something like that. It's not that kind of saintly purification. It's just following the logos because it's fun, because it's rational, because it's excellent, because it helps us, because it's beneficial. You have to force yourself when you realize it's most worth doing. It's fun. It's the best game in town. So you would start to naturally desire it. The more you're in this game, the more you'll naturally desire it. More than drinking, more than gossip, more than following celebrities, and so on. So true phronesis. You have to fight yourself. You're not courage in the face of fear. You'll start to develop, I actually do know that this is true, even though my senses and the ups and downs of life give me shadows. I know that this is true, so I can hold on to this. Natural courage. And if you can see it and understand it, wisdom. So clear seeing, precise seeing. So how do we see? Well, we have to be able to look at it, which is this turning around of the soul that we do through the dialectic, through the doctrine, separate the soul from our senses and the body as a whole, so we can see it, which is that unification, that through contemplation, the same word contemplation. So we can see it, but how do we get clear seeing and a seeing where we can use it to look out for ourselves? You got to be able to recognize the pattern in it. You got to have the logos and dialectic with you. So you can see it clearly. You're not overwhelmed by it, confused by it, or afraid of it. I know this. This is the logos. This is all this work I've done on beauty. All this work I've done on justice. All this work I've done on goodness. All this work I've done on greatness. All this work, etc. I can see it there. And there's a pattern here. I can use this pattern. It's the paradigm. We've said the logos and dialectic is in all things, allowing us to read this text, understand this text, understand the text as a whole as well, understand the mythology, but also understand being itself. Wow. Come on.
Wow. 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 Wow.
Even Owen Wilson thinks so.
Wow.
So we see it, we got sight, but we see it clearly. And we can use it to care for ourselves, so that we can use it to benefit, care ourselves, become useful and beneficial to ourselves and in the world. So how do we see it? Nous. How do we see it clearly? Dianoia. What's that? Logos and dialectic. What if we don't have those things? Well, you'll be enslaved by depravity. And however more clearly you see as you grow, that by so much more you get better at your vice. So the old adage, the people who are older are wiser because they're learning more. We can say, actually, the older they are, the vice version of wise they are. The more depraved wisdom they have. Why? Because they get more subservient to depravity based on how much more clearly they see. So if they're learning in their life, and we can recognize it, look at older people, get more entrenched in their ignorance, in their pathologos. You can see it etched into their faces, their constant scowl. right? The Karens, the mega Karens, the old Karens, the boomer Karens, which is nothing other than becoming more subservient to depravity, to their vice. The word is badness, which isn't a slight. It's just the truth. We're not blaming them because they just haven't awoken philosophy and the dialectic yet. They haven't read this. But we're not being blind to it and pretending they're all saints either. No. Those who do the worst vice, the most depraved, have a level of power, a level of excellence directed towards their depravity. So this is what we're seeing also. So there's a kind of negative phronesis, a negative temperance, a negative courage, and negative wisdom. Vice version, the distorted reflection in the lower dimension. And we want to be careful of that. So we want to be interested in the true virtues, which is not wisdom directed towards clearly seeing things in your body, but wisdom directed towards clearly seeing being and the logos and the dialectic. Same thing for desiring in temperance, same thing for holding on to with courage, same thing for doing with justice, all together. All right, so that was a fun little dive into the pool of the Republic. Fantastic book. I'm excited to get into that for maybe the next one, the next read along. Thank you for joining me. It's been a lot of fun. I hope this sort of recap of where we are was helpful and interesting and fun. So we're kind of going over, we're turning back around to what we've done and defining it again. And in defining it, talking about how it's demonstrating itself in the text. But then how does it divide itself out into our world? By understanding the grifters, understanding the cycles of history, understand how it plays out in grifters and tyrants and being stuck in that cycle. So that's division stage. How does it divide out into our own life with our negative dialectic? That's stagnant ousia compared to the self-dialectic, which has an evolving ousia. And coming back to understand what we're doing here. What are we doing here? Developing an understanding of the dialectic, going back to it over and over, checking in with this podcast, having it on in the background while you're doing other stuff maybe. I don't know how you watch it. So that we can what? Master the logos and dialectic. Why do we want to master dialectic? Number one, it's that which purifies us for the experience of contemplation of nous, of true being, truth. We're lover of truth. But also, it's what we need for the true virtues, so we don't fall into that which we just read. Depravity, vice. We need to be directing our development, our learning in all of the virtues and everything towards the dialectic, which is also needed when we have that, so we can experience it and use it for the paradigm, and we can upgrade those virtues into true phronesis and use it. Become it, be it. And if it's true phronesis that never loses its power, it's therefore the kind of learning that goes beyond this lifetime. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
If what we're seeing in the Phaedo is true, that there is a process of coming to be alive and being alive, coming to die and dying, that's cyclical. And we've seen already 4 arguments that show why it must be so. Therefore, if you don't believe it, you kind of have to change your mind, work at that. That's courage. If that's the case, then we are going through cycles of reincarnation. We want to make sure that we're not stagnating, repeating the same problems like the negative dialectic. We want to evolve to higher and higher levels of reality, meaning there has to be something we can learn that we can take with us even into our next incarnations. Otherwise, what's the point of this whole game? Are we just like that meme? Are we here just to suffer? No. So long as there's something that we can learn that we can take with us. And if the text is showing us, the logos is showing us that there is something that never loses its power, it is therefore eternal and immortal, and therefore won't lose its power after death, therefore is the kind of learning that we can take with us. That is a kind of hypothesis to the question of why the heck are we here? What are we supposed to be doing with our time? And what's the ultimate activity? What's the best game in town, the only game in town? Well, it's got to be some sort of learning, and it's got to be something that can not lose its power, even in death. So we've said, well, you could say philosophy is the excellence of learning. It's the best use of reasoning. It's the highest concepts. It's the highest ideas put together. And the dialectic is the best use of the logos. You could say, well, it's also the excellence of our cognitive functions. Hey, I can be the sort of person moved by colors and shapes, but we kind of make fun of those people. They're like, terrible people and stupid people, and they have the most conflict, like those sort of people, the racist people, the angry people who are moved by colors and shapes. They're the most sad, and as well as internally, but also function in the worst way, do the most harm. It's either, what's the text say? Useful and beneficial, or useless and harmful, depend on how well it subservient to depravity. So we don't want to be that. So what's our question? What's the excellence of cognitive functions? If the logos and dialectic is the excellence of reasoning, what's the excellence of cognition? Nous. Oh, interesting. Dianoia into nous. You could ask the question, well, what's the excellence of learning? What's the best thing you can learn while we're here? It's got to be something that goes beyond this lifetime. Another question of excellence, seeing again and again that the question that really draws us into philosophy is excellence, or whatever you're interested in. Interested in understanding? Excellent. You're into philosophy. Excellence of understanding. You want to awaken the highest cognitive function? Oh, that seems to be nous and ousia. Oh, excellence of your faculties as a being. What's the highest capability? What's my highest superpower? Excellence. What's the excellence of learning? Well, purifying ourselves from this depravity, causing harm, being useless and harmful to ourselves and others, and perfecting ourselves in a kind of learning that goes beyond our lifetime, which is phronesis. So, why are we learning dialectic? To prepare ourselves for nous, number one. Number two, to develop our own true learning for the virtues. You need the logos for our virtues. Number three, when you combine those together, you can upgrade yourself, level up. From our personal development virtues to the spiritual development virtues. Number four, it's a kind of learning that goes beyond our lifetime, and therefore it's only rational. Do you want to learn something you're going to forget in your next lifetime, or something that will never lose its power? So it's the excellence of learning. And five, learning the dialectic is learning what we need to change our minds. If we want to be good, if we want to develop, we want to be able to change our minds. Yes, we want to have that understanding of how to change our mind to apply it to the grifters, the con artists, the fascists, those people who are acting in the positions of power when they should be acting for the benefit of us, and they don't. And they contradict themselves and they act in a useless and harmful way. And we say, hey, don't do it. And hey, why not? What's your principle of saying I should change my mind? I thought you just believe whatever and you vote. Isn't that? I can get away with not paying taxes. Isn't that clever? No, that is literally defined as depravity, the vice version of wisdom. You can precisely see how to not pay your taxes, how to con the people to, sell the resources of your country to some billionaire overseas. This one right here. So yeah, you can use it to understand corruption and have a principle to point out what's wrong and solve our problems globally, but also within yourself, address that inner voice. It's both, but primarily it's within you. But we want to change our mind. We don't want to be stagnant like that. We want to learn what it takes to change our mind so that we're not being conned ourselves. Conned, boo, thumbs down for being conned. We want to change our mind, 2 thumbs down, being conned. We want to change our mind not because we're being conned, but because we've learnt the dialectic and we know what should change our mind. But also, not even if it's protecting it as a shield from the con artist, but it's also a short sword to move forward towards our higher goals, reach the end of the levels. 2 thumbs up. Because we want to change our mind. We want to know how to change our mind, what's the right way of changing our mind, and how to do it most efficient. So what's the text that we just read? We want to figure out how to change our mind in the most we want to change our mind in the most with the greatest ease and effectiveness. The best way. Learn the game rules and master the game. Turn around with the greatest ease and effectiveness. So, why are we learning dialectic? So we can change our minds. Number 1, why are we learning dialectic? Number 1, to prepare ourselves for the experience. Noose here. Number 2, to develop the virtues and not have vices and become more harmful to ourselves and others. Number 3, when you combine those 2 together, you can upgrade to true self-renaissance. Number 4, that's a learning that never loses its power. So it's a learning that's most rational to do while we're here because it goes beyond our lifetime. It takes with us in our cycle and reincarnation, hopefully to another level. And number 5, so we can change our mind in the right way, best effectively, efficiently. And we're going to jump into the text next time and see if Simius is able to change his mind, because he needs to be convinced that the soul is immortal, just like we need to do. We might feel like it's not immortal, so we need to change our mind. So we're going to see what are the arguments that will change his mind, if it works, but also look for the dialectic too. We're learning both the, this is the 2 levels of learning, the particulars and the thing itself, the parts and the whole. The particulars, can we be convinced that our soul is immortal? And number 2, what was the structure of the dialectic used to change his mind? So we can do that too. Apply it not just to the soul, but everything we want to learn. How do we change our mind to find the truth in everything? So that's what we're doing next time. Learning about the immortality of the soul and learning about how Socrates uses the dialectic to change Simius's mind and our mind. Wow! For those 5 good reasons why we're doing it. I hope that was exciting. I hope that was fun. That was so much fun. It's so much fun to bring the ideas back around, doing a dialectic on the dialectic. It's so cool.
Wow.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. I hope you have some questions. I hope you have some new questions for your hypothesis, question sack, and hypothesis for your if sack in your inventory.
Wow.
I hope you feel like you might be starting to level up too. And I hope you join me for the next one. Thank you so much. I am going to take a quick break. Be pulled away by the necessities of the body for a little bit. And I'm going to come back. And if you're with me in the chat, I hope you stick around. And we're going to jump back into the Phaedo. Be right back.